3 creepy true janitor horror stories. Story 1. The Night Shift at Riverside Elementary. What happens when you're alone in a school at night and you start hearing children's voices? But school ended hours ago? My name is Marcus and I worked as a night janitor at Riverside Elementary School for 3 years. What I'm about to tell you is the reason I quit that job and why I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. It started like any other Tuesday night in October. The school had been empty since 4 p.m., and I began my shift at 10 p.m. The building was old, built in the 1950s, with long hallways that seemed to stretch forever under the flickering fluorescent lights. I had gotten used to the creaks and groans of the old building settling, but this night felt different from the moment I walked in. I started my routine in the cafeteria, mopping the floors and wiping down tables. The silence was heavier than usual. Even the heating system seemed quieter. As I worked, I kept getting this feeling that someone was watching me. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck? It wouldn't go away. Around midnight, I was cleaning the second grade hallway when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the pipes or maybe a radio someone had left on, but as I stopped mopping and listened carefully, I realized what I was hearing. It was children singing. The voices were faint but clear. They were singing Ring Around the Rosie in that slow, eerie way kids sometimes do. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the sound, my wet sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. The singing was coming from classroom 2B, Mrs. Henderson's room. The door was closed, but I could see light flickering underneath it. Not the harsh fluorescent light, but something softer, like candles. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, but all the desks had been moved into a perfect circle in the center of the room. In the middle of the circle were chalk drawings on the floor. Not the kind of drawings kids usually make. These were symbols I didn't recognize, drawn in perfect lines and curves. The singing stopped the moment I stepped into the room. The silence that followed was deafening. I shined my flashlight around the room, and that's when I saw them. Wet footprints, small ones like a child would make. They led from the circle of desks to the coat closet in the corner. I should have left right then. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out. But I had to know. I had to see what was in that closet. I walked over slowly, my flashlight beam shaking. The closet door was slightly open, just a crack. I could hear something inside. A soft whimpering sound like a child crying. I reached out and pulled the door open. Nothing. The closet was empty except for a few forgotten sweaters and lunch boxes. But the floor was soaking wet, and there was a smell I'll never forget. It was sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left in water too long. I backed out of the room and closed the door behind me. I was done for the night. I didn't care if I got fired. But as I walked away, I heard the door creak open behind me. When I turned around, all the lights in the classroom were on, and I could see small shadows moving past the windows. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran all the way to the parking lot and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could stop shaking enough to drive home. The next day, I called in sick. I couldn't bring myself to go back. But I had bills to pay, so 2 days later I returned to work. The principal, Mrs. Garcia, was waiting for me. "Marcus," she said, "we need to talk. Did you move the desks in room 2B the other night?" I told her I hadn't touched anything in that room. She looked confused and a little worried. "That's strange," she said. "Mrs. Henderson found her classroom completely rearranged when she came in yesterday morning. All the desks were in a circle, and there were chalk marks all over the floor. She thought maybe you were playing a prank." I assured her I wasn't, and she believed me. But then she said something that made my blood freeze. The weird thing is, this isn't the first time it's happened. The last janitor quit about 6 months ago. He said the same thing happened to him. Kids singing at night, desks being moved, strange symbols drawn on the floor. That's when she told me about the accident. In 1987, there had been a fire in the old part of the school during a Halloween party. 7 children had been trapped in what used to be the gymnasium. They never found all the bodies. The gymnasium had been torn down and rebuilt as the classroom wing where I'd been working. Room 2B was built right where the old gym stage used to be. I finished my shift that night, but I kept all the lights on and played music on my phone the whole time. I didn't hear any singing and I didn't see any shadows. But when I checked room 2B in the morning before I left, the desks were arranged in a circle again. This time there was something else. On the blackboard, written in that same perfect chalk handwriting, were the words, "We want to play." I quit that day. I walked into the principal's office and handed in my keys without explanation. Mrs. Garcia tried to convince me to stay, offering me a raise, different hours, anything. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't spend another night in that building. A few weeks later, I heard they'd hired a new night janitor. His name was Dave, and he was a tough guy who'd worked security before. Mrs. Garcia probably thought he could handle whatever was happening better than I could. Dave lasted exactly 1 week. On his last night, security cameras caught something that made the local news. The footage showed all the classroom doors opening and closing on their own. You could see Dave running down the hallway, and right behind him, clear as day, were the shadows of children. 7 of them, running and playing like it was recess. The school board decided to hire a cleaning company that works during the day now. They never officially said why, but everyone in town knows. Riverside Elementary is haunted, and those children are still there, still wanting to play. Sometimes I drive by the school at night. The building looks normal from the outside, but if you look carefully at the second grade wing, you can sometimes see lights flickering in the windows. And if you roll down your windows and listen very carefully, you might hear them singing. They're still there. They'll always be there. And they're still looking for someone to play with. Story 2. The basement keys. Some doors should never be opened and some keys should never be used. I learned this the hard way in the basement of St. Mary's Hospital. I need to tell someone about this. It's been eating away at me for months and I can't keep it inside anymore. My name is Sarah, and I used to work as a janitor at St. Mary's Hospital. Used to. I'll never set foot in that place again. St. Mary's is an old hospital, built in the 1920s. It's got that classic institutional look with long corridors, high ceilings, and more floors than most people realize. What most people don't know is that there are sub-basements underneath the main basement, areas that aren't on any official floor plan. I'd been working there for about 6 months when my supervisor, Mr. Peterson, called me into his office. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with tired eyes and hands that shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. "Sarah," he said, "I'm going to give you a promotion of sorts. You'll be taking over the deep cleaning duties in the sub-basement levels." He handed me a ring of old keys. They were different from the modern key cards we used everywhere else. These were old-fashioned metal keys, the kind you'd see in a horror movie. Some of them were rusty, and they all had numbers scratched into them instead of being properly labeled. "Now listen carefully," Mr. Peterson said, and his voice got very serious. "There are rules you need to follow down there. Very important rules." He pulled out a handwritten list and read it to me. "Never go down there alone. Always take someone with you. Never use key number 13. That room stays locked no matter what. If you hear someone calling for help, don't answer. It's not real. Never stay past midnight. Be out of there by 11:45 p.m. at the latest. If you see a woman in a nurse's uniform from the old days, leave immediately." I thought he was trying to scare me. Maybe some kind of weird hazing ritual for new employees. I laughed and asked if he was serious. He didn't laugh back. "Sarah," he said, "the last person who had this job broke these rules. We found him in sub-basement level 3, locked inside room 13. He'd been there for 3 days. When we got him out, he couldn't speak for a week. When he finally could talk, all he'd say was, 'She's still down there. She's still down there.' He quit the next day and moved to another state. I took the keys and the list thinking I'd humor the old guy. How bad could it be? The first few weeks were fine. I always brought Jenny, another janitor, with me when I went down there. The sub-basements were creepy, sure, but not anything I couldn't handle. They were mostly used for storage now. Old medical equipment, files, and supplies that nobody needed anymore. The rooms were small and cramped, with thick concrete walls and heavy metal doors. The lighting was poor, just a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It smelled like disinfectant and something else I couldn't identify, something sweet and sickly. Room 13 was at the end of the longest hallway in sub-basement level 3. The door was different from the others. It was newer with multiple locks and there was no window. Someone had painted over what looked like scratch marks on the door. I could still see them underneath the paint. Jenny always got nervous when we passed room 13. "There's something wrong with that room," she'd say. "I can feel it watching us." I told her she was being paranoid, but honestly I felt it too. There was something about that door that made my skin crawl. Everything changed on a Thursday night in March. Jenny had called in sick, and Mr. Peterson told me I could skip the sub-basement that night since I'd be alone. But I was behind on my cleaning schedule and I figured I could just do a quick run through the easier areas. I should have listened to rule number 1. I went down to sub-basement level 1 first. It was the least creepy of the 3 levels. Mostly just old furniture and supplies. As I was mopping the hallway, I heard something that made me freeze. Someone was calling for help. It was a woman's voice, very faint, coming from somewhere deeper in the hospital. It sounded like it was coming from the lower levels. I remembered rule number 3, but the voice sounded so desperate, so scared. What if someone was really in trouble? What if a patient had gotten lost or a staff member had been hurt? I followed the voice down to sub-basement level 2. It was getting louder now, more urgent. The woman was crying and begging for someone to help her. She sounded young, maybe in her 20s. "Please," the voice said, "I can't get out. The door is locked. Someone please help me." The voice was coming from sub-basement level 3, from the direction of room 13. Every alarm in my head was going off, but I couldn't ignore someone who might be in real trouble. I went down to level 3 and the voice got even clearer. "Help me, please. I've been here so long, so very long." I walked down the hallway toward room 13. The voice was definitely coming from behind that door. I pulled out the ring of keys and found number 13. It was older than the others, almost black with age. I knew I shouldn't do it. I knew I was breaking the most important rule. But the woman sounded so scared, so desperate. I put the key in the lock. The door opened easily, like it had been waiting for me. The room was small and empty except for an old hospital bed in the center. But it wasn't empty. There was someone on the bed. It was a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform from maybe the 1940s. She was lying perfectly still, her hands folded over her chest. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were closed. But she was the one who'd been calling for help. I knew it even though her lips weren't moving. "Thank you," she said without opening her eyes. "I've been waiting so long for someone to let me out." That's when I noticed her wrists. They were strapped to the bed with old leather restraints, but the restraints were rotted through, falling apart. She could have freed herself at any time. She opened her eyes and looked right at me. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye. "My name is Margaret," she said, sitting up on the bed. "I used to work here. A long time ago. They brought me down here when I got sick. When I started seeing things that weren't there. They said I was dangerous." She stood up, and that's when I saw that her feet weren't touching the floor. "But I wasn't dangerous then," she continued, floating toward me. "I am now." I ran. I dropped my keys and my mop and I ran. Behind me I could hear her laughing, a sound like breaking glass. The lights in the hallway started going out one by one as I ran past them. I made it to the elevator and punched the button over and over again. When the doors finally opened, I saw Margaret's reflection in the metal doors. She was right behind me, but when I turned around, the hallway was empty. I rode the elevator to the ground floor and didn't stop running until I was in my car in the parking lot. I sat there shaking for I don't know how long. The next morning, Mr. Peterson found me in the break room. I hadn't gone home. Had been too scared to leave the hospital, but too scared to go back downstairs. "You opened room 13, didn't you?" he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded and he sank into a chair beside me. "Margaret died in that room in 1943, he said. "She was a nurse here during the war. She started having what they called episodes. Seeing patients who weren't there, talking to people who'd died. The doctors thought she was having a nervous breakdown. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. They locked her in that room for treatment, but the treatment back then, it was barbaric. They left her strapped to that bed for weeks. She died alone down there, calling for help that never came. But she's been locked in that room all this time," I said. "How is she dangerous?" Mr. Peterson looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "She's not locked in anymore. You let her out, that was 6 months ago. Since then, 3 patients on the psychiatric ward have died under mysterious circumstances. All of them were found in their beds, perfectly peaceful, but with expressions of absolute terror on their faces. The nurses on the night shift report seeing a woman in an old-fashioned uniform walking the halls. She goes room to room checking on patients, but anyone she visits dies before morning. I quit the next day and moved across the country, but I still have nightmares about that room, about Margaret's black eyes and her voice calling for help. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear her voice again. 'Thank you for letting me out,' she says. 'Now I can help so many more people.' She's still there at St. Mary's Hospital, still helping people the only way she knows how, and it's all my fault." Story 3. The security footage. When you work alone at night, you rely on security cameras to keep you safe. But what happens when the cameras start showing you things that shouldn't exist? This happened to me 2 years ago, but I still can't watch security camera footage without getting panic attacks. My name is Robert, and I was a night janitor at Crosstown Office Complex, a 15-story building downtown that housed various businesses and law firms. The building was modern, built in the early 2000s with state-of-the-art security systems. There were cameras everywhere, hallways, elevators, stairwells, even some of the larger offices. As the night janitor, I had access to the security office where I could monitor all the feeds on a wall of screens. The security company had told us that if we ever saw anything suspicious, we should call them immediately. Break-ins, vandalism, anything out of the ordinary. What they didn't tell us was what to do if the cameras started showing impossible things. I worked alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 5 nights a week. The building was supposed to be empty during those hours except for me. All the businesses closed by 6 p.m., and the cleaning was done overnight to avoid disrupting the workers. My routine was simple. I'd start at the top floor and work my way down, cleaning offices, emptying trash, vacuuming, and mopping. I'd check the security monitors every hour or so, just to make sure everything was normal. For the first few months, everything was fine. Boring, even. The most exciting thing that happened was when I found a family of mice in one of the law offices. Then October came around and things started getting weird. It began with the elevator cameras. I'd be working on one floor, and I'd see the elevator moving on the monitor. The doors would open and close on different floors, but nobody would get in or out. I figured it was just a mechanical issue. Old elevators sometimes do that, but then I noticed something else. The timestamp on the elevator camera was different from the other cameras. Not by much, just a few seconds, but enough for me to notice. When I checked with the security company, they said all the cameras were synced to the same time server. There shouldn't be any difference. The next week it got worse. I was cleaning the 8th floor when I decided to check the monitors. I always kept one eye on the screens because being alone in a big building at night could be creepy. On camera 8A, which showed the hallway I was working in, I saw myself mopping the floor. But I was looking at the monitors in the security office on the 1st floor. I stared at the screen in confusion. The figure on camera 8A looked exactly like me, wearing the same uniform, using the same mop and bucket. But it was moving differently. The movements were too smooth, too repetitive, like someone was playing the same action over and over again. I ran to the elevator and went back up to the 8th floor. The hallway was empty. My mop and bucket were exactly where I'd left them, but the floor I'd been mopping was dry, like it had never been wet. When I went back to check the monitor, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a glitch in the system. Maybe the cameras were playing back old footage or something, but deep down, I knew what I'd seen wasn't normal. The following night, I decided to pay closer attention to the monitors. I set up a chair in the security office and watched all the screens while I took my dinner break. That's when I saw her. It was around 2 a.m. when she appeared on camera 12C, which covered the hallway on the 12th floor. She was a woman in a business suit, walking slowly down the hallway, checking doors like she was looking for something. I'd never seen her before, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be in the building. I grabbed my radio to call security, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She wasn't casting a shadow. The hallway lights were bright, and everything else in the frame had normal shadows. But this woman was walking around like shadows didn't exist for her. I watched her for about 10 minutes. She went from door to door, trying handles, peering through windows into offices. When she got to the end of the hallway, she just vanished. 1 second she was there, the next second the hallway was empty. I rewound the footage to watch it again, but there was nothing there. The timestamp showed continuous recording, but the woman was just gone from the video. I called the security company anyway. They said they'd review the footage, but when they called me back an hour later, they said there was nothing unusual on any of the cameras. No woman, no unexplained activity. But I knew what I'd seen. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Working alone at night can play tricks on your mind. Maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed it. Then I saw him. It was a Thursday night around 1:30 a.m. I was in the security office when movement on camera 5B caught my attention. There was a man in the 5th floor break room, sitting at one of the tables with his back to the camera. He was wearing a dark suit, and he was perfectly still. Not moving at all, just sitting there like a statue. I watched him for 20 minutes. He never moved, never shifted in his chair, nothing. I decided I had to investigate. I took the elevator to the 5th floor and walked to the break room. It was empty, but the chair where the man had been sitting was pulled out from the table and it was still warm. I ran back to the elevator and went down to check the monitor. The man was gone, but now there was something else. On the table where he'd been sitting was a piece of paper. I went back upstairs to check, and sure enough, there was a note on the table. It was written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "We know you can see us now." My hands were shaking as I read it. I looked around the break room expecting to see someone hiding in the shadows, but I was alone. I took a picture of the note with my phone and went back to the security office. I spent the rest of my shift watching every monitor, but I didn't see anything else unusual. When I got home that morning, I looked at the picture on my phone. The note was blank. Just a white piece of paper, but I knew what I'd seen. The incident started happening every night after that. I'd see people in the building who shouldn't be there. Men in suits, women in business clothes, sometimes even children in school uniforms. They'd appear on one camera, disappear from another, and leave behind small traces of their presence. A coffee cup that was still warm, an elevator button that was lit up, a window that had been opened from the inside. The worst part was that they seemed to know I was watching them. They'd look directly at the cameras sometimes, staring right into the lens like they could see me. One night I saw a little girl on the 3rd floor. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a school uniform that looked like it was from the 1950s. She was walking down the hallway, dragging something behind her. When I looked closer, I realized she was dragging a length of rope. She walked all the way to the end of the hallway, where there was a window that looked out over the city. She climbed up on a chair, tied the rope to the ceiling fixture, and made a noose. I couldn't watch. I turned away from the monitor, but I could hear something. A sound coming through the speakers that shouldn't have been possible. The cameras didn't have audio, but I could hear crying. A little girl crying. When I looked back at the screen, she was gone. But the rope was still there, hanging from the ceiling. I ran upstairs to check, and the rope was real. It was old and frayed, like it had been there for decades. That's when I realized the truth about Crosstown Office Complex. I did some research and found out that the building was constructed on the site of an old school, Riverside Elementary School, which had been torn down in 1999 after a series of tragic incidents. There had been accidents over the years. A teacher who died in a fire, students who'd been hurt in various ways, and in 1987, a little girl named Emma Patterson had hanged herself in one of the classrooms after being bullied by her classmates. The people I was seeing on the cameras weren't intruders. They were the ghosts of everyone who had died in that place over the decades, and for some reason, the security system was picking them up. But why could I see them when nobody else could? I found my answer when I was researching the security company. The cameras had been installed by a company called Peterson Security Systems. The same Peterson whose son had been one of the students who bullied Emma Patterson. Mr. Peterson had installed the cameras himself, and according to the records, he'd insisted on using a specific type of camera that was sensitive to different light spectrums. He'd told the building owners it was for better night vision, but I think he had a different reason. I think he wanted to see them. He wanted to know if they were still there. The cameras weren't just recording what was happening in the building now. They were recording everything that had ever happened there. All the pain, all the tragedy, all the unfinished business, and now I was seeing it all. I quit the next day. I couldn't handle it anymore. The constant feeling of being watched. The knowledge that I was sharing the building with dozens of lost souls. The fear that one day they might decide to do more than just appear on camera. But quitting didn't make it stop. The ghosts followed me home. Now I see them everywhere. On traffic cameras, security monitors in stores, even on my phone sometimes when I'm taking pictures. They're all around us all the time, and most people just can't see them. But once you've seen them, once you know they're there, you can never unsee them. The new janitor at Crosstown Office Complex lasted exactly 1 week. The security company had to replace their entire camera system, but it didn't help. The building is still haunted, and the cameras still pick up things they shouldn't. If you ever work alone at night and you have access to security cameras, be careful what you look for. Because sometimes the cameras show you more than you want to see. And once you've seen it, there's no going back. They're still watching me. Even now, as I write this, I can see them in the reflection of my computer screen. Standing behind me, waiting. They know I can see them, and I think they like it.